last year, the United States economy effectively set $3.1 trillion on fire.
Which is just a staggering amount of money.
Right. $3.1 trillion with a T. And, it wasn't because of a catastrophic stock market crash or some massive global supply chain failure.
No, nothing like that.
It wasn't a natural disaster or an unprecedented geopolitical event. It was simply because managers, like people sitting in offices and on retail floors across the country, made decisions based on absolute garbage data.
Yeah, and that's a number that should honestly terrify anyone listening to this who's, currently running a team or maybe studying to run one eventually.
Oh, sure.
Because you can have the most visionary leadership in the world, right?
Yeah.
But if the foundation of your decision-making is flawed, the financial hemorrhage is, well, it's almost unavoidable.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are doing a special installment custom-tailored for the brilliant undergraduate business majors at the Dr. Sandbach College of Business at Tarleton State University, along with all the working professionals tuning in.
Always great to have both groups here.
Exactly. So today, we are cracking open the actual mechanics of making decisions. We're drawing heavily from the frameworks laid out by Richard Tedman and Casey Wilhelm in their 2026 research on management information systems.
Right, their Connect Master curriculum.
Yep, that's the one.
Yeah.
We're going to figure out how you as a manager can cut through the noise and, well, avoid contributing to that $3.1 trillion bonfire.
It's actually a really natural progression from our last conversation, if you think about it.
Oh, yeah, the CRM deep dive.
Exactly. If you recall, in our previous session, we deconstructed Module 14, right? Customer Relationship Management Systems. We looked at how those CRM platforms serve as these massive engines for data acquisition.
Right. We talked about tracking individuals through the acquisition funnel, separating out your marketing qualified leads from sales qualified leads.
Yeah, and doing the heavy math to calculate customer lifetime value, all of that.
But the entire focus of that CRM discussion was really about how to gather a mountain of customer data.
Just gathering it, yeah.
But gathering the data is like just the prologue.
Yeah.
The core issue we have to tackle today is the logical next step. Like, what do you actually do with all those terabytes of information once they're just sitting on your servers?
You use it to make decisions. Because, data resting in a server rack has zero inherent value.
Right. It's just taking up space.
Exactly. Its only value is realized when it informs a choice that alters the trajectory of the business. And the reality of modern management is that you are making those choices under extreme duress.
Yeah, it is not a relaxed environment at all. But hey, before we throw you into the deep end of how to survive that duress, I have a quick favor to ask you, our listener. If you're using this to study for your coursework or prep for your next board meeting, take a second to like, subscribe, follow, and share this on whatever platform you're listening on right now.
It genuinely helps you stay updated.
It really does. And more importantly, please drop a comment. We really love seeing the ongoing debates and conversations between Tarleton State business students and MIS professionals out in the field.
It creates this tremendous learning ecosystem when the theory actually meets real-world application in the comments.
Completely agree. Yeah. So let's start by defining the battlefield here. We throw the word manager around constantly. But if we break down what a manager's role actually entails, where do we even start?
Well, I think the best place to start is with the foundational theories, specifically Henry Fayol's 5 classical functions.
Okay, lay them out for us.
So he argued that a manager's role is strictly categorized into planning, organizing, coordinating, deciding, and controlling.
Planning, organizing, coordinating, deciding, and controlling. Got it.
Right. It presents management as a very orderly, sequential process.
And then there's Mintzberg, right?
Yeah, Henry Mintzberg took a swing at this too. He categorized the roles into 3 distinct buckets instead.
Which are?
First, you have the interpersonal roles. This is the manager acting as like the figurehead and leader, so representing the company to the public, motivating employees, handling the human element.
Okay, the people stuff.
Exactly. Second, the informational roles, where the manager acts as a central hub receiving data and disseminating it to subordinates. And third, the decisional roles, which involve initiating new strategies, resolving conflicts, allocating budgets, that kind of thing.
Those frameworks are essential, obviously, for understanding the underlying anatomy of the job. But I think we both know that reading those definitions gives a highly sanitized view of what it actually feels like to do the job.
Oh, absolutely.
Because I would absolutely push back on the idea that management is some, orderly sequence of planning and controlling. The textbook theories make it sound like a manager sits in a quiet, mahogany-paneled office.
Thoughtfully stroking their chin.
Right. reading a bound report, and then issuing a grand sweeping decree. Like if you are listening to this on your commute to a mid-level management job right now, you are probably laughing out loud.
Because the reality of a manager's day is blistering. It is pure fragmentation.
Fragmentation is the perfect word.
Research into actual managerial behavior shows that their days are almost never made up of long, uninterrupted blocks of deep strategic thought. Instead, they operate in a continuous state of rapid-fire, short-timed activities.
Let's ground this in a narrative that we can track through this whole conversation. Let's invent a company.
Okay, I like that.
Let's call it Frost & Peak, a legacy winter sports retailer. They sell high-end skis, snowboards, winter apparel, all that stuff.
Okay, Frost & Pitch.
So if you are the floor manager at a massive Frost & Peak retail location, your morning does not start with quiet reflection. You walk in, and HR immediately calls you about a complex dispute between two employees that needs your intervention right now.
Right, and while you are trying to untangle that interpersonal conflict, your phone buzzes because an employee called in sick, meaning you are short-staffed on the floor.
Yes, so now you are scrambling to find coverage.
And then 10 minutes later, a cashier pages you because a heavily advertised winter boot discount isn't applying at register 4.
And there's a line of frustrated customers forming.
Exactly. You don't have time to read a 20-page PDF on register software protocols. You need the override code in 10 seconds.
That speed and that fragmentation dictate how managers consume data. Because they're constantly putting out fires, managers heavily prefer current, highly specific, actionable information.
And they also tend to prefer oral communication over formal written reports just because it's simply faster.
Right. But this human limitation, our inability to process massive data sets while juggling a dozen localized fires, is the exact reason the business world has shifted toward high-velocity automated decision-making, isn't it?
It is. Which brings us to the sheer scale of the data problem. Human beings are currently producing 2.5 quintillion bytes of data every single day.
2.5 quintillion, that's absurd.
To break that down to an individual level, every single person generates an estimated 1.7 megabytes of data every second.
Every single second. Wow.
A human manager cannot possibly synthesize that volume. It outstrips our cognitive capacity by orders of magnitude.
So what happens?
So high-velocity decision-making removes the human from the loop entirely. It is executed purely by computers, utilizing algorithms that can identify an issue, calculate a solution, and implement it in milliseconds.
Let's think about the e-commerce side of our hypothetical company, Frost & Peak.
Good example.
A customer visits the website to look at a pair of snowboarding goggles. The website's algorithm instantly analyzes their past purchase history, cross-references it with current warehouse inventory levels, factors in the real-time pricing of 3 competitor websites, and dynamically adjusts the price of those goggles by a few cents.
While simultaneously recommending a specific brand of helmet.
Exactly. The entire transaction happens faster than a human could even blink. The algorithm is making thousands of decisional choices a minute, optimizing for transactional speed and volume. It allows the business to operate at the speed of the internet.
But computers can only automate the routine algorithmic choices, right? Humans still have to make the major strategic decisions.
And this introduces a massive vulnerability that Tiedemann and Wilhelm highlight regarding management filters.
Yes, the human filter.
The terrifying truth is that even when human managers are handed perfect, high-quality data, they frequently still make terrible decisions. Why is that?
Because every human being processes information through their own psychological and experiential filters. We do not view data objectively.
We think we do, but we don't.
Not at all. And one of the most powerful psychological forces at play in management is loss aversion. Behavioral economists like Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky proved that the pain of losing something is psychologically twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining something equal.
Okay, so how does that play out in the boardroom, like in a practical sense?
It means managers are notoriously structurally risk-averse. If a data model suggests a bold new strategy that has a 70% chance of tripling revenue, but a 30% chance of failing and making the manager look incompetent.
The manager's filter will almost always reject the data.
Yes. They rely on their intuition, their perception of office politics, and their desire for self-preservation over the cold, hard facts.
So they will actively sabotage a good data-driven decision to protect their own job security.
They will. And to combat this flawed human filter, enterprise organizations are increasingly implementing rigid risk management systems.
Right, because you have to force them out of that bias.
Exactly. The architecture of these systems is designed to bypass human psychology. Take a platform like LogicGate, for example, which is a cloud-based risk management software.
How does software force a manager to be brave?
Well, it doesn't force them to be brave, really. It forces them to be objective. What LogicGate and similar systems do is automate routine risk assessment tasks using deadline-triggered requests and dynamic standardized questionnaires.
Okay.
And then it generates custom analytics and visual sheet maps based on those standardized inputs.
Oh, I see. So it removes the manager's ability to just say, I have a bad feeling about this, let's kill a project.
Exactly. They're forced into a standardized workflow. They have to look at the objective heat map of critical enterprise risks, and they have to justify their decisions against that unblinking data rather than their subjective intuition.
It forces accountability to the data.
It does. Now, recognizing that we have these two extremes, algorithms making microsecond decisions on pricing and humans wrestling with their psychological filters on big strategy, we need a way to categorize the types of decisions a business actually makes.
Right, which is where we separate decisions into structured, unstructured, and semi-structured categories. Let's stick with our legacy winter sports company, Frost & Peak, to map this out.
Perfect. Let's start with structured decisions.
These are the easiest to grasp, I think. These are routine, repetitive tasks. They have prescribed definite, mathematically clear procedures for how they should be handled.
Yeah, they're usually handled by operational staff or lower-level management. A structured decision does not require a philosophical debate.
In the context of Frost & Peak, a perfect structured decision is inventory reordering for ski wax. The store's enterprise system has a rule. If the inventory of brand X ski wax drops below 20 units, automatically generate a purchase order for 50 more units from the supplier.
There is no ambiguity there. The parameters are predefined. If X happens, execute Y. You want to automate as many structured decisions as possible to free up cognitive bandwidth for the leadership team.
But then you have the complete opposite end of the spectrum, right? Unstructured decisions.
Yes, the decisions that keep executives awake at night.
Exactly. Unstructured decisions are significant, non-routine, and usually carry massive, far-reaching implications for the survival of the organization.
There is no predefined manual for them. There is no algorithm that can just spit out the correct answer. The decision maker has to rely heavily on judgment, evaluation, and complex insight.
Okay, let's introduce a chaotic element to Frost & Peak to illustrate this.
Oh boy. Okay.
Let's say the CEO, Richard, we'll call him Richard, recently went on a wellness retreat and became utterly obsessed with hot yoga.
Sounds like a CEO.
Right. So he comes back to the corporate office in late October, right before the winter rush, and announces a massive strategic pivot. He wants to start phasing out winter sports gear to rebrand Frost & Peak as a premium indoor hot yoga lifestyle brand.
Wow, okay.
He wants yoga mats in the main window displays, winter coats pushed to the back clearance racks, and a total overhaul of the marketing budget.
That is the ultimate unstructured decision.
And if you are the general manager of the flagship store, it is a terrifying one.
Because the variables are vast and totally undefined. You're looking at market exit strategies for winter gear, massive brand dilution, a completely unknown supply chains for yoga equipment.
And the massive financial risk of abandoning your core demographic right before your most profitable quarter.
Exactly. A computer cannot make this choice for Richard. It requires a deep, messy synthesis of market intuition, risk tolerance, and long-term vision.
And just to close the loop on these categories, there are also semi-structured decisions, which kind of sit in the middle. For instance, if Frost & Peak's data suddenly shows that sales of snowboards in the Denver territory have plummeted by 40% in 1 month.
Okay, so the system flagged the drop. That's the structured part.
Right. But figuring out why it happened requires a semi-structured approach. The manager has to look at the data, but then go interview the sales reps, check local weather patterns, and investigate local competitors to piece together the answer.
Exactly. You are blending hard data with human investigation.
But let's go back to Richard's disastrous hot yoga pivot.
Let's do it.
If you are a senior leader at Frost & Peak, and you know this unstructured decision is going to destroy the company, how do you fight it? You can't just walk into Richard's office and say, I have a bad feeling about this.
As we discussed, subjective feelings don't win arguments.
No, they don't. You need frameworks to structure the complexity of that decision. Which brings us to one of the most fascinating tools in management science, the Analytic Hierarchy Process, or AHP.
Ah, AHP.
It sounds like something out of a theoretical physics textbook. What is the actual mechanism behind AHP?
So AHP was developed by a mathematician named Thomas Sadie. And at its core, it is a multi-criteria mathematical model.
Right.
Its entire purpose is to take incredibly complex, multifaceted environments, like a massive corporate pivot to hot yoga, and deconstruct them into a visible hierarchical matrix that can be objectively analyzed.
I really want to dig into the how here. How does it actually work? Because the textbook notes that it takes both quantitative data like server cost or shipping fees and qualitative data like human feelings or brand loyalty and evaluates them together. How do you turn a feeling into math?
That is the genius of Satie's model. It uses something called pairwise comparison.
Pairwise comparisons.
Yeah,
Okay.
let's say Frost & Peak needs to choose a new software vendor for this new yoga inventory system. You're comparing vendor A and vendor B. The AHP model doesn't just ask which is better. It breaks down your criteria, let's say cost, implementation speed, and user interface.
Okay, so we have our 3 criteria.
The model then forces you to compare them directly against each other on a numerical scale, usually 1 to 9. It asks, how much more important is implementation speed than cost?
Oh, I see.
You might answer with a 7, meaning speed is strongly favored. Then it asks, how much more important is user interface than speed? You might give that a 2.
So I am taking my subjective managerial intuition and forcing it into a quantifiable ratio.
Yes. And the AHP software takes all those pairwise comparisons, builds a complex mathematical matrix, and calculates a weight for every single variable. Once the weights are established, it runs the data for vendor A and vendor B through that weighted matrix, and it calculates the literal mathematical probability of success for each alternative.
That is brilliant. Think about how many corporate meetings devolve into 2 executives just shouting their opinions at each other.
Too many.
AHP acts as a mathematical referee. It assigns a precise weight to your priorities. Just like a college syllabus might weight a final exam at 40% and a weekly quiz at 5%.
That's a great analogy.
They both matter, but one mathematically impacts the outcome much more. AHP tells you, objectively, which choice aligns best with your stated priorities.
It removes the ego from the decision-making process. Now, AHP is fantastic for evaluating specific operational choices. But if we are looking at the overarching health and strategic direction of Frost & Peak, executives rely on a different framework entirely.
Which is?
They use executive support systems, or ESS, and the crown jewel of ESS methodologies is the balanced scorecard.
The balanced scorecard, developed by Robert Kaplan and David Norton. This is a concept that fundamentally rewires how a person views business success.
It really does.
Because if you ask a layperson how to tell if a company is successful, they will always say, look at how much money they make.
Right, show me the profits.
But a balanced scorecard says that is a dangerous, incomplete way to run a business.
It is incredibly dangerous because financial metrics are lagging indicators. They tell you what happened in the past. If your net income is terrible today, the mistakes that caused it were made 6 months ago. The balanced scorecard forces management to look at the organization across 4 distinct quadrants, using key performance indicators, or KPIs, for each.
Let's walk through the 4 quadrants using Frost & Peak. The first quadrant is, of course, financial, because you still have to keep the lights on.
Naturally. The KPIs here are your traditional metrics: revenue growth, return on investment, cash flow, net income. If Frost & Peak is bleeding cash because of the yoga pivot, this quadrant will obviously flash red.
But then we move to the second quadrant, internal business processes. This is where we look under the hood.
This measures operational efficiency. Even if you are making money, how chaotic is the process of making it?
Exactly.
KPIs here include supply chain efficiency, inventory turnover rates, execution time for new product launches, and quality control error rates. If Richard's new yoga mats take 3 times as long to manufacture and have a 10% defect rate, your internal processes are failing.
Then we hit the third quadrant, which I actually find the most compelling: learning and growth. This is an investigation into the company culture and its human capital.
It is the ultimate leading indicator, because if this quadrant fails, the financial quadrant will eventually collapse.
Right. So what are the KPIs for learning and growth?
They include employee retention rates, job satisfaction scores, the number of training hours logged, and diversity metrics like gender and ethnic ratios across leadership.
Let's pause here, because this is where the balanced scorecard really proves its worth. Imagine Frost & Peak implements Richard's yoga pivot. Let's say, miraculously, a bunch of curious people buy the yoga mats, and the financial quadrant shows a record Q4 profit.
Okay, Richard is popping champagne.
Exactly. But if you look at the learning and growth quadrant, The retention rate has plummeted. Your best, most passionate winter sports employees, the ones who have been fitting customers for ski boots for a decade, are disgusted by the pivot.
They feel betrayed.
Yes, and they are quitting in droves to work for a competitor. If you were just looking at the financials, you'd think you were doing great.
I mean, yes, and taking that a step further, the balanced scorecard reveals that your financial success is an illusion. You are cannibalizing your institutional knowledge for a short-term cash grab. Your business is actually in severe long-term jeopardy, even though the bank account looks full today.
That is the power of the framework. It prevents executive tunnel vision.
Absolutely.
And finally, the fourth quadrant is customers. This tracks the external perception of your brand. KPIs include customer satisfaction scores, customer retention, net promoter scores, and on-time delivery rates.
So the balanced scorecard gives you the complete diagnostic view. You see the finances, the internal gears, the people turning the gears, and the people buying the product.
It is a brilliant framework. However, there is a massive vulnerability here.
Oh, there's always a catch.
None of these models, not AHP, not the balanced scorecard, not the most advanced AI algorithm in the world, will save you if the information you feed into them is fundamentally flawed.
We return to the oldest rule in computer science: garbage in, garbage out. The impact of information quality on decision-making cannot be overstated.
Which brings us back to that terrifying number from the start of the deep dive. Over $3.1 trillion lost annually in the U.S. economy due to bad data. If data is the lifeblood of these decision models, how do we ensure it isn't poisoned?
We turn to the standards set by the Data Management Body of Knowledge, or DMBOK. They define data quality with a very simple, pragmatic phrase. Data must be fit for consumption and meet the needs of the consumer.
I love that phrase, fit for consumption. I visualize it like a municipal water treatment plant. You wouldn't pull water straight out of a muddy river, bypass the filtration systems, and serve it in a restaurant.
No, it would make everyone sick.
But businesses do this with their data all the time. They pull raw, unfiltered, muddy data out of their systems, feed it into their balanced scorecards, and wonder why the company is dying.
That is a perfect metaphor. To ensure data is fit for consumption, the water has to pass through 6 specific filtration checks, which we call the 6 characteristics of information quality.
Let's run a batch of data through the 6 filters. Filter number 1.
Accuracy. Does the collected data accurately describe and associate with real-world conditions? If your system says you have 500 snowboards in the warehouse, but a physical count shows only 50, your data is inaccurate and therefore toxic.
Makes sense. Filter number 2.
Completeness. Is the data well structured, and does it include all the elements that were intended to be collected? Are there missing fields in the customer profiles?
Filter 3.
Relevance. Is this specific data actually useful to the current goal of the organization? We often drown in data simply because we have the capacity to store it, regardless of whether it actually helps us make a decision.
Filter 4.
Validity. Was the data collected using legitimate, approved techniques, and is it formatted correctly according to system parameters?
Filter 5.
Timeliness. Is the data available when you actually need it, and does it reflect current market conditions? Last year's sales data is not a timely indicator for next week's demand.
And finally, filter 6.
Consistency. If data is stored in multiple disparate locations across the enterprise, does it match? You cannot have a supplier's billing address be one thing in the accounting database and a completely different address in the procurement database.
Let's put these filters to the test with a scenario at Frost and Peak.
Yeah, all right, let's see it.
It's mid-December. The store is packed with holiday shoppers buying ski gear. 2 floor employees come up to you, the manager, and say, hey, we've had several customers complain about a specific brand of heated ski gloves. We think they're defective and we should pull them from the shelves.
Okay, a potential crisis.
Right. So you ask for the data. One employee says, well, the customers couldn't really remember when they bought them. The other says, I think one bought them back in October. Then they hand you a massive, unformatted, printed spreadsheet listing every single transaction the store processed in October, and they say, this might help.
As a manager trained in MIS, your immediate reaction should be to reject that information entirely. It fails almost every single filtration check for data quality.
It is deeply polluted water. First off, timeliness. it's December. A vague issue from October is not timely data when you need to make an immediate decision about pulling inventory off a busy holiday floor.
And it fails relevance spectacularly. Handing you an unformatted list of every single purchase made in October does not isolate the heated ski gloves. It is just a haystack of irrelevant noise.
And completeness, it's non-existent. Anecdotal complaints from several unnamed customers who can't remember their purchase dates is not complete data, it is office gossip. If you pull thousands of dollars of inventory off the floor based on that, you are making a massive, unstructured decision based on data that is entirely unfit for consumption.
So if anecdotal spreadsheets are terrible, how do managers get clean formatted data? They rely on management information systems to generate 3 distinct types of reports. These reports are the lifeblood of middle and operational managers.
Let's break down the MIS report Triad. What is the first one?
The exception report. This is arguably the most valuable for a manager's time. Exception reports are designed specifically to pinpoint outliers that vary from the established norm.
I think of exception reports like a smoke detector in your house. You do not want a smoke detector that beeps every 5 minutes to say, the air is fine, the air is fine, the air is fine. That's useless noise.
Exactly. You only want it to scream when there's actually smoke. That's precisely how they function. If a sales rep hits their quota, you don't need a report. But if a rep's performance suddenly falls 20% below the predefined threshold, the exception report flags it. If an employee fails to complete a mandatory compliance module by the deadline, it generates an exception alert. It directs your managerial attention only to the fires that actually need putting out.
What's the second report?
Production reports. These track current and predicted levels of output. They answer the operational question. Based on our current rate of activity, will we meet our production or sales goals for this cycle?
And a third.
Forecasting reports. These take a longer view, providing information about future expectations and predicting whether current conditions will allow the company to meet those long-term strategic goals.
And alongside these formal MIS reports, managers are constantly utilizing a more granular tool, pivot tables. We have to talk about pivot tables because they are the unsung heroes of corporate data analysis.
They really are. A standard relational database is great for storing data, but it is often two-dimensional and rigid. Pivot tables allow a manager to perform multi-dimensional data analysis right inside a spreadsheet software environment.
Explain the mechanism there.
Yeah.
Why is a pivot table so much more powerful than just like sorting a column from A to Z?
Because a pivot table allows you to twist and reorient massive data sets on the fly to expose intersections that you wouldn't otherwise see. Let's say Frost & Peak has 100,000 rows of sales data. Sorting it doesn't help much, but with a pivot table, you can drag product type to the rows, zip code to the columns, and time of day to the filter.
And suddenly, out of that massive sea of data, a hidden pattern emerges. You realize that Richard's weird hot yoga mats are only selling in 3 specific zip codes and only between 6 a.m. and 8 a.m.
Exactly. You find the hidden correlation. You couldn't see it in the raw data, but by pivoting the dimensions, the pattern becomes blindingly obvious.
Okay, we've talked about operational reporting. Let's shift to a framework used for structuring broader, often more qualitative research questions, particularly regarding corporate sustainability. The textbook outlines the Belief Outcome Action Framework, or BOA.
The BOA framework is a fascinating methodology for mapping the psychology of an organization against its actual behavior. It breaks down into 3 sequential components. First is belief formation.
What does that mean in practice?
It means defining and understanding the psychic states of the operating environment. This involves identifying the beliefs, desires, and recognized opportunities within the company, and crucially, measuring them against the beliefs held by external stakeholders.
Okay, give me an example.
For example, does Frost & Peak's executive board believe that environmental sustainability in manufacturing is a core value? And do their customers share that belief?
You're trying to find alignment? If the company believes sustainability is a joke, but their core demographic believes it is vital, you have a massive misalignment in belief formation.
Correct. Assuming there is alignment, you move to the second component, action formation. This is the transition from philosophy to reality. Are those stated beliefs translating into actual tangible actions?
Right. This is where you put your money where your mouth is. If Frost & Peak says they believe in sustainability, do they actually overhaul their supply chain to reduce carbon emissions? Or did they just put a green left logo on their website?
Which leads directly to the third component, outcome terminology. This is the structural accountability phase. It involves establishing the specific methods and information systems used to measure and monitor the actions you took. You create metrics to track the performance of the sustainability endeavor to determine if it was actually a success or a failure.
So BOA belief, action, outcome. It creates a clear, accountable pipeline from what we value to what we actually do about it to how we mathematically prove that it worked. It's a great framework.
It is. But I want to circle back to the crisis we introduced earlier. We left the general manager of Frost & Peak in a terrible position. Richard, the CEO, is demanding the company abandon winter sports for hot yoga.
Yes, the unstructured decision nightmare. If I am that manager and I know this pivot will bankrupt the company, how do I stop it? I can't just rely on a pivot table. I need a way to present a mathematically backed, emotionless argument to the CEO that proves his idea is catastrophic without making it a personal attack that gets me fired.
This is where you deploy multi-criteria decision analysis, or MCDA. It is arguably your most powerful shield in corporate strategy.
MCDA. Okay.
MCDA is an analysis tool that shares some DNA with a traditional cost-benefit analysis, but it is far more sophisticated. It is not constrained purely by monetary units. It allows you to compare highly varied criteria across IT infrastructure, economics, market dynamics, and operational realities.
So it's not just yoga costs X, skiing costs Y. It's a comprehensive 5-step process to objectively destroy a bad idea. Let's walk through the 5 steps of MCDA and say Frost & Peak. Step 1.
Describe the context. You cannot analyze a decision in a vacuum. You must clearly define the organizational landscape and the stakeholders involved. In this step, you would likely integrate a SWOT analysis, mapping the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of the company, or a PEST analysis, looking at political, economic, social, and technological factors.
Got it. So you established that Frost & Peak is a legacy brand with deep roots in winter sports and zero brand equity in the wellness space.
Exactly. You set the stage. Step 2, identify available options. You have to compare different mutually exclusive paths forward. Option A is the status quo. Continue dominating the winter sports market with minor optimizations. Option B is Richard's mandate. Pivot entirely to indoor yoga gear.
Step 3.
Identify and select objectives and criteria. What exactly are we measuring to determine success? This is why you get granular. You aren't just looking at potential revenue. You might select criteria like expected Q4 foot traffic, customer acquisition cost, employee retention probability, supply chain volatility, and brand dilution risk. You define the specific consequences you are going to measure for each option.
Now, step 4, which sounds a lot like the AHP model we discussed earlier.
It is very similar. Step 4 is measure each criterion. This is where you determine the weight or level of importance for each objective. If brand dilution is considered an existential threat to the company, it gets a massive mathematical weight. If the cost of new store signage is negligible, it gets a very low weight. You assign numerical values to the importance of every factor.
And finally, step 5, the grand finale.
Calculate the values. You score option A and option B against all the criteria, multiply those scores by the assigned weights, and aggregate them into a final objective number.
And there is your weapon. I, as the manager, compile this comprehensive MCDA report. I schedule a meeting with Richard. I don't go in there and say, your yoga idea is stupid.
Definitely don't do that.
Right. Instead, I slide the report across the mahogany desk and say, Richard, we ran the multi-criteria decision analysis based on our market context, our weighted objectives for Q4, and the structural risks to our supply chain. Option A remaining in winter sports scores an 87. Option B, the yoga pivot, scores a 14.
You take the personal conflict completely out of the equation. You are not fighting Richard. The math is fighting Richard. MCDA is the ultimate tool for proving your point with unassailable data and effectively saving your own job and the company.
Okay, we've spent a lot of time on evaluating options and fighting bad ideas. But what happens when things just break? What happens when a manager is faced with a failure and has to actually solve a problem from scratch?
Problem solving is arguably the most vital subset of decision-making, and the hardest part of problem solving is the very first step, actually discovering and defining the true problem.
Which sounds obvious, but it isn't. Because what we usually see are just the symptoms. If you have a fever, the fever isn't the problem. The virus causing it is the problem. In business, we need a way to find the virus. And the source material highlights a classic, almost aggressively simple methodology for root cause analysis. The 5 whys.
Ah, yes. It was originally developed by Sakichi Toyota for the Toyota Motor Corporation, and its brilliance lies in its simplicity. You state the problem you're experiencing, and then you ask why it happened. Whatever the answer is, you ask why that happened. You repeat this iterative process until the true root cause reveals itself and is mutually agreed upon by the stakeholders.
Let's run a live simulation of the 5 whys. I will play the role of the frustrated manager at Frost & Peak, and you can be my systems analyst.
Okay, I'm ready.
Here's my problem statement. We are getting destroyed on social media today because customers are furious that the massive 40% online discount we advertise for snowboards isn't applying at checkout. Why is this happening?
Well, looking at the back end, the promotional descriptions published by the marketing team don't match the specific code specifications the programming team needs to activate the discount.
Okay, but why aren't they matching? Why didn't the programmers just code the discount correctly?
Because the sales team, who negotiated the discount, never communicated the exact mathematical specifics and the start time to the programming team.
Why didn't the sales team communicate it? They know how a sale works.
Because the senior sales manager delegated the responsibility to junior sales reps late on a Friday without giving them clear instructions on who in IT they were supposed to contact.
Why wasn't there a clear instruction?
Because Frost & Peak has no mandated follow-up procedure and absolutely no formalized communication protocol between the sales department and the IT department before a promotion goes live.
Boom. We found the virus. The problem isn't that our e-commerce tech is broken. The problem isn't that our customers are impatient. The true root cause is a structural failure in our internal communication protocols. If I just yelled at the programmers to fix the code, the problem would happen again next week. The 5 whys cuts through the symptomatic noise and forces you to fix the actual broken pipe.
It is incredibly effective. And once you have used the 5 whys to find that root cause, the manager must transition into designing a solution and choosing an alternative.
Which is easier said than done.
Much harder than it sounds. Designing a solution requires identifying everything you know and everything you don't know. It requires creating multiple contingency plans, forecasting possible outcomes, and allocating finite resources, your money, your time, your staff's effort to implement it. And choosing the right alternative is notoriously difficult because you are almost always comparing subjective strengths and weaknesses of different operational changes.
To bring all of these concepts together, from the chaos of the manager's morning to the math of the MCDA, the source material presents a beautiful, overarching architecture for decision-making. It was developed by the Nobel laureate Herbert Simon. Let's walk through Simon's 4-stage decision-making process as our grand finale.
Gladly. Simon structured the process into 4 sequential stages. Stage 1 is intelligence.
I always picture a spy gathering reconnaissance when I hear that.
And that's exactly what it is. The intelligence stage is the discovery, identification, and cognition of the problem. This is where you use your MIS exception reports to realize something is wrong. You gather the data. You use the 5 whys to understand why the problem exists, where it is located within the enterprise architecture, and what its operational impacts are.
You survey the battlefield. Then we move to stage 2, design.
The design stage is pure exploration and creativity. You are not making a choice yet. You are identifying and exploring various possible solutions to the problem you found in the intelligence phase. You generate alternatives. You map out different paths the company could take.
Then comes the moment of truth. Stage 3, choice.
This is where the heavy lifting happens. The identified alternatives from the design stage are evaluated. You might deploy an AHP matrix to weigh your priorities or run an MCDA to mathematically score the options against your context. Once the analysis is complete, you make the choice and select the most viable alternative.
And finally, stage 4, implementation.
You put the chosen solution into action. You deploy the resources. But crucially, Simon's model doesn't end just because you flip the switch. Implementation heavily involves monitoring the solution, perhaps using the outcome terminology from the BOA framework to ensure it is actually working as intended.
And if it isn't working?
If it fails, the process is not linear, it's a loop. You feed that failure data right back into stage 1, the intelligence phase, and the cycle begins again. You reevaluate what you know and design a better solution.
Intelligence, design, choice, implementation. It is a continuous, rigorous cycle. And that, my friends, is how you navigate the absolute chaos of modern management. You don't rely on gut feelings, you don't succumb to loss aversion, and you definitely don't pivot your ski company to hot yoga without running the map.
It has been a masterclass in applying structured, rational frameworks to unstructured, irrational environments.
It really has. I want to sincerely thank you, the listener, for joining us on this incredibly deep dive into the mechanics of making decisions. Whether you are sitting in a lecture hall at Tarleton State University or commuting to your office, Mastering these frameworks, from the balanced scorecard to MCDA to Simon's 4 stages, is exactly what will set you apart in the business world. You won't just be reacting to fires, you will have the architectural knowledge to prevent them.
It is always a pleasure to unpack these critical concepts with you.
Before we sign off, a quick reminder. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, follow, and share this episode. And we want you to engage directly with what we just discussed in the comment section today.
Yes, we want to see you apply the theory.
Here is your prompt. Think about a business you know intimately. It could be the company you currently work for, a past job, or even a local restaurant you visit every week. Think of a recurring, frustrating problem they seem to constantly face. Using the 5 whys framework we practiced today, start with that symptomatic problem and trace it down in the comments. Ask why 5 times. What do you think is the actual hidden root cause of their issue? Drop your 5 whys in the comments, and let's see what kind of operational viruses you uncover.
I am genuinely looking forward to reading those analyses. It is the best way to train your managerial intuition.
And looking ahead, you now know how to manage customer relationships from our last module. And today you learned how to make the hard, mathematically driven decisions. But how do you actually take those decisions and execute them in the real world? How do you get a massive new business initiative across the finish line on time, under budget, and without your team imploding? Join us next time as we dive into Module 16, Project Management, and discover why even the most brilliant data-backed decisions will completely fall apart without a master plan.
It is going to be a vital capstone to everything we've covered so far.
Until then, tomorrow morning when that alarm clock goes off, take a second to consider whether hitting the snooze button is a structured or unstructured decision. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.